This is a new session for me and Sally. This is session 14 for me and Sally to continue our discussion around learning C Sharp, building applications end to end. Sally, I think last time you and I talked a little bit about, being able to. I think we had a couple of things that we needed to do for our library there. Do you wanna?
Yes. Actually, we wanted to put the remove, add the remove, and
Mhm.
also do validate one. So remove by ID, not the remove. So I already add those. So do you want to pull it out or?
Yeah, I'll pull the code. So here's the code. Let's see here what we have. I'm gonna pull straight from master. Here you go. So technically, where do we start? We start from the interface for iBook service. So I
Yes.
see remove book by ID, and if I go into the implementation for this code, I can see here you went and said, okay, validate this ID, select the book by ID, and whatever comes back, pass it into the delete, and then return the deleted book. That's perfect. And in the validation here, you're just passing in the ID. So here's the ID, book is invalid parameter. This is all perfect. Um, this is this is you basically, this is the entire functionality, because you're basically going up in here. Also for these methods that don't need a scope, you can single line them. I'll just single line them like this. Just showing you what this part is. And then let's run the test. So do you have all the tests running? I'm assuming everything is up and running here. Let's take a look real quick. Yep, everything is up and running.
Mm.
And the last thing to check on is the order of things. So if we go here, the commit history always tells us how things were working. So um I see remove by ID fail and then pass and then validation exception fail, validation exception pass. Your failing test here were basically just you going and saying, here is my interface. And here's my method that basically will say remove by ID, create a random book, pass in the book, make sure this guy returns a storage book, and then you move on from there to do the deletion and all that. Okay, sounds good. This sounds like a good deal to me. Um, so what's the next thing for us today? What should we do today? Today we're gonna talk about rappers. Rappers. What are these rappers? Not rappers like 50 Cent, rappers like, I don't know, shawarma rap, I guess. So these rappers are basically what helps us categorize the many exceptions that may come out of a particular service. And what does that mean? I'm gonna share the black screen here with you in a second, and we're going to talk about these in a second because this is us taking all of this to the next level. Okay, now bear with me because this one is really important for you to understand how this piece is going to work. So here is the black screen. Let's go down here. Okay, so let's just visualize this for a second. Assume that you have this function in here,
Mhm.
and this is one function that you just created, and this function say it's basically retrieve, or sorry, delete book by ID. Okay. The exceptions that we know about today that can come out of something like this is just the validation exception. That's all we added in there. So this is an exception. An exception is just an issue that could happen out of this function. So you have one exception coming out of this guy like this. And that's just a potential exception that it is invalid book exception, right? That's one exception. But there is other exceptions that can happen out of this particular situation. For instance, assume that we're trying to pass in a book ID. So this is your input coming in. That's your input parameter. And your input here basically says, I want to basically, so it's my input and this is an ID that I'm passing in. So what if the ID here does not correspond to a book that actually exists in the database, right? What if the ID that I'm passing in is basically targeting a book that I don't have yet? or does not exist anymore in my system. What should we do then? Let's go back to the code and let's talk about this. There are so many different types of exceptions that happen. Then we're going to talk about wrappers, right after that. So let's imagine this situation. In the exceptions here, you have null book exception and you have invalid book exception. So we already have two types of these exceptions. I'm going to add another type in here, and this new type is going to be called not found book exception. A not found book exception basically is an exception library, an exception type that will basically take the ID about the book and return back and say, I couldn't find any book that matches, the ID that you passed in. So the ID here is an ID, and then the message here is to basically go and say base book with ID. Right, here's your ID here. This is the ID that we're passing in.
Is only apply on ID, so not other attribute?
Yeah, because the ID is the identifier for the book, right? In any other place, when we try to search by anything else, we say here's a list of nothing. Like if we can't find it, because any other attribute could be like you could have multiple
Mm,
books that have the same name,
mm,
right? Like especially in the tech industry, you'll find 50,000 books that say C sharp, starting new with C sharp and all that, right?
mm,
So, um, so we need to kind of identify the issue. So I'm basically here, I say book with ID, blah, blah is not found. That's the issue that I have here, right?
okay,
And what am I going to do about this? Let's go ahead and copyrights in here. I don't know if we have made this a habit here yet. I think we have.
we did most
We
of
did, right? So let's go here, control period, add header. There you go. So, okay. So I need to write a test in here. It's a part of the validation.
it.
And let's go to the retrieve by ID. You're going to start with the retrieve by ID, and I'm going to let you do the other one yourself. So in here, I'm going to go and say, here's a fact. Public void should throw not found exception if book is not found. So the ID doesn't correspond to anything. So I'm going to go and say, well, if there is nothing that's coming back from that particular ID, I should throw an exception that says not found.
Mhm,
So how is that going to work? I see. Given when then, and then here's some ID. I say some ID because it doesn't matter. I'm going to return not found anyway, right? So this is GUID, new GUID. And then I'm going to go here and say book, no book. Not null book, no book. That's me basically going and saying that this mock, whatever is being called on this mock, this broker mock, to do a select book by ID, and I'm passing in some ID, it doesn't matter here. It is any,
mhm,
because I want this issue to happen either way. It doesn't matter whether the ID that is being passed in is truly there or not. I want to go here and say this guy will be rows, right? No, it's just gonna return no book. Returns, there you go. Returns no book. So the database is doing its part. The broker is going and saying, I don't have a book in here. But what we're actually throwing is that var not found book exception. This is your new not found book exception. And this not found book exception is asking us for what? Not found book exception. So I'm expressing a situation that is unlikely to happen in terms of, basically validation in terms of the data that is being passed in. And what this guy is needing is some ID as an input parameter. Now let's see why the autocomplete is not helping me out here. Let's see. Invalid. This should be under exceptions. Not found. Not found book. Oh, because it's internal, of course. It's fancy. Okay, there you go. Not found book exception. And then of course the rest here is just as usual. We have an action, and this is retrieve book by ID action, which is basically, right, me doing the book service, I'm passing in some ID. There we go, just like this. That means I can go here and say assert throws, right? Not found book exception. Retrieve book by ID action. So this is me going and saying, when I run this action, right, this exception will occur because this ID does not correspond to anything. What do I really want to verify here as well? I want to go here and verify, oh yeah, that we actually tried to make that call.
Mhm.
Right, select book by ID. Here's your sum ID, and that what actually happened through times once. In fact, actually, I wouldn't even say sum ID here. I'll just say it is any good because it doesn't matter
Mhm.
really. There is this guy, and then the last thing here is that me going and saying, well, this is mock, verify no other calls, done.
Mhm. Right.
All right, so let's review what we did here. We basically went and said, here's some ID that I really don't care about, and here's no book, and what I expect to happen is that I should get not found book exception. That's my expected exception, right? And I'm basically going and saying this storage broker mock, when it's being called, is gonna return nothing. And then I'm gonna actually run the service. I'm gonna verify not found has been thrown. I'm gonna verify selecting the book by ID has been called one time, and then no other calls have happened throughout this entire operation. Let's run this and see it failing. Here we go. So here we go. And this guy is failing. Why? Because it says I expected you to return not found book exception. And what you actually returned, you didn't actually throw any exceptions in here. So let's write a failing test in here first. Just fail. There you go. And let's make this pass. You wanna try and make it pass? You wanna take this on your side and see?
Let's see if I will pull it.
Yeah, let's give it a shot. See.
Okay, we'll go with this on. Let me share because there is some problem here.
Okay.
Okay. Do you see my screen?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. So here I can you want retrieve by you or no?
Yeah, it's on retrieve by ID under validations.
Okay.
You'd have another test in here. Is that the one? Yep, you got it right there at the very bottom.
Okay, go to oops, sorry. I went to diffraction, something else.
Mhm.
Go back. 3.
Run all the tests first. That should always be your step. Run all the tests, find the one that's failing, and then from there you start working your way back into the implementation. Start with it this way. Right? All right, here's our failing test. Let's go to the code here. Here's the code. Where's the pointer?
The point
Where's the pointer? Where's the failing test?
cannot
That
see.
guy here. So
Yeah,
that's the one.
yeah, that's the
Okay, now let's go wherever the win is. That's where the action is.
right.
Nope, go
Oh,
back one. Let's try again.
this
Where's the win section?
should be come to the services, right?
Right, but it went to the broker, so we must have clicked the wrong one. Let's try that again.
It is selected. Oh, retrieve by design. Go to implementation. Okay, here.
All right, so what's the expected from us here? What's the test says if this select by ID returns nothing, we should throw an exception. And that exception should be that the book is not found, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how are we going to implement that?
So we should go to this one. So if that's my, I'm still like trying how, like similar to if book is like.
Yeah, but if book is null is validating an input, we're validating a returned value out of calling the broker. Hmm. Let's go back to the service again. Go back by one, just one step back.
Mm-hmm. Here we get the, hold on, can you repeat one more time? So here, basically the exception is that.
The exception is that whatever comes back from select book by ID,
Mm-hmm.
if it's null, then we need to throw an exception that says I couldn't find the book.
But do we already have the null, right?
Yeah, but null book exception is for the input. This time we're going and saying there's nothing in
Oh,
storage.
okay. By ID. So basically here we validate the storage broker input.
The storage broker return type.
Return output. Um, I think I need your help.
Just try, give it a shot.
Mm.
You know, where is whatever the broker returns? Where do we have it here in our realm?
Mm. Can you repeat your question? I don't.
The
Okay.
storage broker is giving us back a book, right? When we
Right.
go search for it. Where is it? Where's that book in this code?
Is this return, right?
That's correct. Let's try to save this in a variable instead of returning the call like we did. Let's save it in a variable instead.
Storage broker equal to, and what is the type? Is book?
Yeah, so we're saving a book, not a storage broker, right?
Yeah. But I wanted to call is output of the storage broker, right?
We could call it storage book, right?
Storage book, yeah. And then how would I fix this? This.
Uh-huh.
And then why this is complaining?
Because it needs you to return something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the method says you have to return a book, right?
Return. I want to return the storage book.
Yes,
Return storage book.
right. So what you just did here is 50% of the solution because now you prepared your code to be able to examine whatever comes back from the database, right?
Right.
So now what's missing? There's one step missing.
Validate, validating this output.
Exactly. Let's validate that the storage broker is not null. If the storage broker is null, what should we do?
We should draw the exception.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. But maybe I will go to generate here. From here, I will.
Now, don't worry about the functions right now. Just get it working. So make it red, make it green, and then refactor later. So your goal right now should be mainly focusing on making sure that the tests pass, and that's it. Don't worry about making it pretty. Don't worry about making it, production ready. You just want to make the test pass. That's it.
Okay. Let me then if basically uh, storage book is no,
Mm-hmm.
no, Maybe is one line, draw an exception.
That's right.
Can put this line. Draw. Dot. What was the exception?
Bug around. We did this before.
Draw something. Oh, they forget. Look.
Maybe it's in the validations file. We did something similar.
I guess now when we fail it, I did that. But then we pass it, right? We correct that one. Draw an exception and draw.
So checking if something is null and then throwing an exception. We did something very similar in the book service.validations. Maybe you can find the answers there.
No, this one. But now we don't. Are we going to draw like a no exception, or we
No,
don't
we're
want
not gonna throw
to
null.
draw this one? We're gonna draw a different exception. Draw new, not no. We're gonna draw. What was the? That's what I'm asking. That was what was the name of the exception? I forgot. The one that we just created.
Let's see what the test is asking for. Let's go back to the unit test and let's see what kind of exception, because unit test should be the guide for you to know what type of exception. Let's go back to the test and see.
Okay, here run test, go to failure. Should we show the test? No, not the test question. Yeah. Show the result window. Okay. No exception was drawn. No exception. So the message is no exception is drawn. No found. Okay, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Oh, because my statement is not correct.
You're also gonna need the reference.
Yeah.
All right. This exception seems to need an input parameter of some type.
Oh, the one that you put ID.
Right.
No, right. It's correct.
Okay. I wonder if we run our test now. Do you think that's enough to make our test pass?
Let's try.
Right. Boom. Done.
Yay. Let's
See?
say you want to have single one, you said, right?
Nope. Don't worry about that. Actually, for all if statements, make sure you do scopes. All you
Oh,
gotta do now is just to hand me over this code that is green so I can do the blue part. The blue part is the refactoring. So just make a commit basically and push it to master. Make sure you copy the test method name first.
oh, that's actually how can I copy it from here? No.
I don't use Mac. I don't know.
Oh, that's go to source command. That was for retrieve, right? Sorry,
Hmm.
you should go all the way down. If put maybe why you didn't put the like retrieve under the name of this to not confuse it, for example, with add or anything else.
We should probably. That's a good idea. We should fix the test name to say should throw not found exception on retrieve by ID if book is not null. That's a great idea.
Let me see if I spell retrieve.
IE.
IE. retrieve and retrieve by ID.
Hmm?
Okay. So it is automatically, I guess, not fixed here, but let me push.
Make sure you copy the test name.
I did. Cancel. Let me save it.
Yep.
Push. Click. Commit.
You don't need the public void and you don't need the open close parentheses when you're making the
Oh.
commit.
But it's still why I'm getting this red one. Before
It's
what?
because your message exceeds a particular limit, and make sure pass is all up, all uppercase.
It didn't go. I have always problem with capital letter. So
All
now
right. Okay. Now we're ready to push. Mhm.
it's perfect.
Okay. Very well done. Now let's take it back to my side. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm gonna pull your code here down. I'm on my screen now, and let me run everything. All pass. Now it's time to clean up, meaning I need to go back here and say this retrieve book by ID. You shouldn't leave your validation hanging in here. We're gonna change the name of this to maybe book. Maybe book meaning I don't know if what's gonna come back actually is a real book or just nothing, right? Because it's 50-50 chance. Is it gonna work? Is it not? Who knows? So that's the first part. The second part here is that I'm gonna go into the validation options and go and say private static void validate storage book. Again, book, maybe book, I don't know. And then I'm gonna go here and say maybe book is null, right? So in C sharp, I think starting from 8, you don't have to do this. You can also do this, especially if you're comparing against a sort of constant. For instance, you can go and say if 1 is 1, something like this. You can do that, but you can't go and say if 1 equals x. It doesn't work like that because x is not a constant. So I'm gonna go here and say throw new not found, book exception, right? And then in addition to this maybe book, I also need what? The book ID,
Book ID, yes.
right? So this is my book ID and here's the book ID in here. So that takes care of the whole operation of being able to go and validate storage book. If I go back here,
Can I
again,
ask this? So why you give maybe book here, not just ID, book ID?
because you still need to examine that it's null, right?
Uh,
So the book here is so I know whether to actually execute the throw the exception or not.
I was thinking, okay, you mean even if the ID is
Even if
not
the book
big,
is null, the ID will never be.
okay, that's one. Okay.
Because that's what's provided, right? And we know that this ID also will always be valid. If we come to this point, the ID will always be valid. Why is that? Why is this ID will always be valid?
But hold on. How about the other case when you're saying when it is null? Okay, book is null, then ID definitely is um invalid. But how about if I for the case that book is not null, but the ID is invalid?
We will never come here if the ID is invalid. But why is that? Let's look at the logic again. Why it's impossible for us that we come to this point here where the ID is invalid.
Because of the
Hmm. So this ID here will never be empty, ever. Why?
because we you put the pub. Okay, we already give them the ID as an input, something, but the ID.
Yeah, but they could pass the ID here as an invalid. But why would it not come here if this guy is empty?
Because we tested.
Because we validate it. And if that ID is invalid, we would throw an exception from here. We would never go into the
Oh,
next step,
okay. Oh, you
right?
put it with a different validation. Okay, sorry, I already forgot that. Yeah,
Right.
right. So
Okay. Mhm.
mhm, I got it.
That's me just going and saying code rub, just clean up storage validation.
One more question I had before we move forward. You
Mhm.
know, storage, um, for storage broker, so we didn't have remove by ID. We had like remove, just delete book, not by ID. But in our services, so we had remove by ID. Why, for example, we don't have only remove book?
Because your end user might not be able to provide the entire topic, the entire object. They might just be able to delete by reference, and they're not required to pass the entire book to us because we don't really use anything in that book other than the ID. So it makes more sense for them because they're not updating a book, they're not, deleting a book, they're not doing any of, they're not modifying a book.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing that we care about in order for them to be able to delete a book is by using the primary key or the reference.
Mm-hmm. Right.
All right. So that's that. That's one other functionality. So as you can see here, our functionality, our service keeps getting bigger and bigger. Like we keep adding more capabilities. Your assignment is to be able to go and say apply the same logic to the remove by ID.
Mm-hmm.
If the retrieved book is invalid, we cannot move forward with the deletion process. Does that make sense? So whatever we did in here, we need a failing test. So I need two things from you. One commit that says should throw not found exception on remove if book is not found. And then the second commit is to make it pass.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. So that's it for today. That's a wrap. Unless you have any other questions, go ahead and the one thing, Sally, I want you to really focus on is that see you're building capabilities in here. If I do control MO, now you're building a production ready service that can actually validate and examine all the inputs and outputs. Now you might probably starting, to see how things are getting a little bit clear. Like there's this layer where all operations are happening, but you wouldn't see if else statements here anywhere, and oh, why is this guy in here? This guy shouldn't be here at all. This function is wrong. Update book. This guy should be books dot oh, we remove an ad because that's what an update is. Okay, because that's a capability that's available. Okay, got it. So anyway, you're starting to see here a pattern, right? You're starting to see, oh, there's this capability that there's something called a broker, and this broker is giving me just really primitive operations. And then these services come in and they offer me a little bit of stuff on top of it. And that stuff basically is like we talked before, there is the validation, processing, and integration. Sometimes there's no processing. It's a very simple primitive operation that does some work. In here, you are doing processing. This is validation, you're processing, you're doing integration, you're getting the book ID, you're gonna examine that book, and then you're gonna actually delete it. So these are the three the tri nature of everything, especially when it comes to software. What are we really examining here? What are we working with in terms of validations. So this is another step in you just understanding the standard and understanding how to build an end-to-end capability. Do you have
Okay.
any questions about any of that?
I just remember that for remove by ID,
Mm.
I forgot actually to put the no validation as well.
And
So
remove by ID here?
we only
Not
validate
null on what? Null on what?
uh, on the test.
Yeah,
Mhm.
there's no like the input is not going to be null.
Oh, for right. I always forget that. Right.
Yeah, this can't be null, right? But what you really want to examine is whatever comes back. And this should be maybe book. Maybe book, just like I did in here. All right, cool.
Right.
Thank you so much for coming in today. I appreciate you. And let's move on to the next session. We're getting closer. This is our 15th session. So you're kind of 25% there,
Thank,
so we'll see how that one goes. Thank you,
thank you.
Sally.
I'm
Have a
excited
good night. Yeah, bye.
for that as well. Bye.